Welcome to Jolene's Stories, where a woman who gave everything finally reclaims it.
My name is Colleen Daniels. I am 54 years old, and the last voicemail my daughter Megan ever left me started with the sound of her fist hitting a door that no longer opened for her. I still have that voicemail saved. Not because I need to hear it again, because some mornings, when the guilt creeps in like lake fog, I press play, and I remember why I changed every lock on a house my daughter treated as her personal ATM for 9 years. She is screaming on that recording. She is calling me confused. She is telling me I do not understand what I have done. But I understood perfectly. For the first time in nearly a decade, I understood everything. And by the time she found that envelope on the kitchen counter, one single photocopy, the text message where she told her husband they just had to keep smiling at Thanksgiving until I died, and the house would be theirs free and clear. By that time, every account was closed, every lock was changed, and the woman who once ran a $4.2 million school budget without a single audit flag had finally audited her own life. What I found cost me $412,000. What I did about it cost my daughter everything she had built on my blindness. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If this story is already tightening something in your chest, if you are thinking about your own mother, your own father, someone whose money you have not personally verified in a while, then you are exactly the person this story is for. Consider subscribing. Consider dropping a comment with the word folder if you know someone who needs to hear this, because this channel exists for one reason: to tell the stories no one believes until they hear the details. And the details in this one will make your hands shake the way mine did in a public library parking lot on a Tuesday afternoon in March. To understand how I got there, you have to go back to the year my husband died and the daughter I raised walked through my front door with a suitcase and a smile I mistook for love. Paul died on a Thursday in October. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in June, gone before the leaves finished falling. We had been married 29 years. He was the assistant superintendent. I was the principal at Westcott Elementary. We were a team in every sense of that word. At home, at work, in our finances. Paul handled the investments. I handled the daily budget. Between us, every dollar had a name and a job. When he died, I inherited his pension, his life insurance, and a house on Meadowbrook Drive that we had paid off 11 years early because that is how two public school administrators build security. I also inherited a silence so loud it woke me at 3 a.m. and kept me standing in the kitchen doorway just to hear the refrigerator hum. Loneliness does not announce itself. It seeps. It fills the spaces between the furniture where another person's breathing used to live. I was 54 years old with a paid-off house, a solid pension, a lifetime of professional respect, and a grief so heavy I could feel it in my knees when I climbed the stairs. Then my knee actually gave out. Replacement surgery. Left side. 8 weeks before I could drive. Megan was 24, living in an apartment in DeWitt with her boyfriend, soon-to-be husband, Garrett. She showed up the day after surgery with that suitcase, kissed my forehead, said she would stay until I was back on my feet. I remember the relief I felt like a warm current running through an icy lake. My daughter. Here. The house would not be empty anymore. I could hear someone else's footsteps on the hardwood and not flinch at the absence of Paul's. She cooked. She drove me to physical therapy. She sat beside me on the couch and watched old movies, and for the first time since the funeral, I laughed without the sound catching in my throat. I did not ask her to leave when the 8 weeks passed. She did not offer. We simply continued. That was the first thread of the web, and I wove it myself with gratitude and grief. The power of attorney was her idea. I was still on pain medication, still struggling with the stairs, and she sat at the kitchen table with a document she said the bank recommended. Limited scope, household bills, utilities, mortgage, which we did not have, but she said it was standard language. I signed it because she was my daughter, and because I had just spent 32 years signing documents, purchase orders, budget amendments, personnel contracts, and I knew what limited scope meant. What I did not know was that limited scope, in the hands of someone who knows your social security number, your mother's maiden name, and every security question you ever set, is a skeleton key to a person's entire financial life. Within 6 months, my pension direct deposit had been rerouted to an account I had never seen. Megan showed me a printout, crisp, professional, the logo of a credit union I recognized, claiming the new account offered a better interest rate. I looked at it for maybe 10 seconds. I said, okay. I set it down next to my coffee mug, the ceramic one my students gave me at retirement, the one that said #1 principal in hand-painted letters with a little red apple. Megan had moved it from my desk to the kitchen counter and filled it with pencils. I remember thinking that was sweet. She was making herself at home. That mug would sit in that spot for 9 years, holding her pencils, while $412,000 of my pension flowed into her life and never came back. The isolation happened so gradually I could not have pointed to a single day and said, that is when it started. My book club met on Tuesdays at the library. Megan said the driving was too much for my knee, offered to take me, then forgot 3 weeks in a row until I stopped asking. My Bible study circle at First Presbyterian, Megan called the coordinator and said I was not feeling up to it, needed rest, would come back when I was stronger. I never came back. My weekly lunch with the retired teachers, Margaret Chen, Barbara Holloway, Diane Russo, Megan said she had heard Margaret talking about me at the grocery store, saying I was letting myself go after Paul died. I believed her. Why would my daughter lie about a thing like that? I stopped returning Margaret's calls. Within 4 months, every friendship I had built over 3 decades had been severed with surgical precision, and the only voice I heard regularly besides the television was Megan's. She became the narrator of my world. She told me who had called and what they said. She told me what the bank statements showed. She told me the house needed repairs I could not verify. She told me Garrett was struggling and could they stay a little longer. She told me I was lucky to have family so close, and every time she told me something, I believed her, because the alternative was believing my only child was lying to me, and that alternative was a darkness I was not ready to enter. The thing about financial control is that it does not require force. It requires trust and repetition. Megan paid the utility bills. She showed me receipts. She handled the property tax, or said she did. She bought groceries, cooked meals, kept the house clean enough. From the outside, it looked like a devoted daughter caring for her widowed mother. From the inside, it felt like comfort. I had someone. The house was not empty. The price of that comfort was my autonomy, but I did not know I was paying it because the invoice never arrived in my mailbox. Megan collected the mail. Every day, without exception. For 9 years, I never once walked to the mailbox and opened it myself. That fact alone should tell you everything about the architecture of what she built around me. Margaret Chen called once. This was maybe 2 years in. She said she had seen Megan at the Destiny USA Mall paying cash, actual cash, a thick fold of bills, for a leather sectional at one of those high-end furniture stores. I confronted Megan that evening. She cried. Real tears, or what I believed were real tears. She said it was a surprise for me. A new couch for the living room. She said she had been saving from her own job. She worked part-time at a dental office then, or said she did, and that she wanted to do something nice for the house. I apologized. I apologized to my daughter for questioning where cash came from that came from me. I called Margaret the next day and told her she had been mistaken, that Megan was a good girl, that I did not appreciate the gossip. Margaret went quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said, "Colleen, you balanced books better than anyone I ever met. Just promise me you're looking at your own numbers." I promised. I lied. I did not look at my own numbers for another 5 years. Rosa saved me. I need you to understand that. Rosa Gutierrez had cleaned my house every Thursday for 18 years. She was there before Paul died. She was there during the illness, washing sheets, leaving meals in the refrigerator without being asked. She was there after, quiet and steady. And she was there when Megan moved in and began rearranging not just the furniture, but the entire structure of my life. Rosa saw everything. She saw the certified letters from a mortgage company that arrived addressed to me. Letters I never opened because Megan collected the mail and told me they were junk. She saw Megan's phone left open on the kitchen counter with text messages she was not meant to read. She saw the new furniture arriving, the SUV in the driveway, Garrett's wardrobe shifting from Old Navy to Nordstrom. And Rosa did something I still cannot think about without my throat closing. She started keeping records. Every suspicious document, every letter she could photograph before Megan noticed, every text message left visible on the counter. Rosa photographed them on her own phone, printed them at the library, and stored them in a folder she kept in her car. She kept a handwritten log with dates. She did this for years, not weeks. Years. When I asked her later why she did not tell me sooner, she said something that broke me open. She said, "I promised your husband before he died that I would watch over you. But I knew if I told you too soon, before you were ready to hear it, you would fire me, and I would lose the ability to protect you. So I watched, and I wrote it down, and I waited for the morning you were ready." The morning I was ready came on a Tuesday in March. It started with something small. Megan's best friend Tanya was at a cookout at the house, Garrett grilling, Megan mixing drinks with a confidence that comes from having money you did not earn. And Tanya, 3 glasses of rosé into the afternoon, leaned over to me on the patio and said, "You must be so proud of Megan, basically owning this gorgeous house at her age." I smiled. I said thank you, and the smile stayed on my face like plaster while something behind it cracked clean through. Basically owns the house. My house. The house Paul and I paid off 11 years early. The house that held 30 years of marriage in its walls. Basically owns. That night I lay in bed and I could not breathe right. Not a panic attack. Something deeper. A rearrangement. Tanya knew something about my house that I did not know. A second person besides Megan who understood the scheme and said nothing to me. The architecture of my entrapment had rooms I had not even entered. The next Thursday, Rosa came to clean. I was standing in the kitchen when she arrived, and something in my face must have been different because she set down her supplies and looked at me the way she had looked at me the morning after Paul's funeral. With a sorrow that expected nothing but offered everything, I said, "Rosa, I need to see my bank statements. The real ones." She did not ask why. She did not hesitate. She went to her car and came back with a folder. 94 pages. 9 years of photocopies, screenshots printed on cheap paper, and a handwritten log in Rosa's careful script. Dates, observations, amounts she had glimpsed on documents left briefly visible. She pressed it into my hands in the hallway, and she said, "I promised Paul." My hands shook so badly the pages rattled. I sat on the hallway floor and I read. For 2 hours I sat on that floor while Rosa cleaned around me, not saying a word, just being there, and I read the documentation of my own robbery. There was a second account. My pension. My full teacher's pension, the one I had earned across 32 years, the one that was supposed to carry me through the rest of my life, had been rerouted to an account at a credit union across town. Every month for 9 years, $3,820 flowed into that account, and Megan's name was the only name on it. $3,820 times 12 months times 9 years. $412,000. Gone. Not into the house, not into my care, into Megan's life. The luxury furniture, the SUV, Garrett's wardrobe, the spa weekends. The vacations I was told were just a quick trip to see friends. All of it purchased with my 32 years of standing in front of classrooms and managing budgets, and staying late to make sure every student had what they needed. But that was not the worst of it. Rosa's folder contained a mortgage document, a home equity line of credit taken out on my house, my paid-off house, for $215,000. Megan had used the power of attorney to leverage my property. The certified letters Rosa had seen were payment notices. Megan had been servicing this mortgage with my pension money, paying just enough to avoid default, siphoning the rest. My house, the house Paul and I built our lives inside, had a debt on it I had never authorized, never known about, never signed with my own hand. I drove to the library. I know that sounds mundane, but it was the only place I could go where Megan's presence did not follow me. I sat at a public computer terminal and logged into the Social Security Administration's website. It took me 15 minutes to reset the password Megan had changed. When the statement loaded, I saw every deposit. Every single month for 3,285 days, routed to an account number I had never seen at an institution I had never visited. I sat in the library parking lot afterward, and I gripped the steering wheel, and I realized I had not made a single financial decision in 9 years. Not one. And I was a woman who ran a $4.2 million school budget without a single audit flag. That sentence, that realization, is the one that changed me. Not anger, not grief. A cold, crystalline recognition that I had allowed my competence to be stolen along with my money, and that both thefts ended today. Then I found the phone. This was 3 days later. Megan was in the shower and her nightstand drawer was half open. She had been careless lately, buoyed by whatever summer plans she and Garrett were cooking. And inside, I saw a phone I did not recognize. A burner. Prepaid. The texts were between Megan and Garrett, and they were written in the shorthand of people who had been conspiring so long they no longer bothered with caution. The one that ended me was 7 words. Mom doesn't suspect a thing, followed by a longer message that I read 3 times to make sure my eyes were not lying to me. When she dies, the house is ours free and clear. Just keep smiling at Thanksgiving. When she dies. My daughter was not just stealing from me. She was waiting for me to die. The inheritance was the end game. The pension was the operating budget. And I was the obstacle between my child and everything she wanted, kept alive and comfortable enough to not ask questions, isolated enough to never find answers. I set the phone back exactly as I found it. I closed the drawer to the same half-open angle. I walked downstairs and I made dinner, and I set the table for 3, and I smiled at my daughter across the mashed potatoes, and I did not let a single molecule of what I knew cross my face. That night, I learned that I could act. 32 years of managing difficult parents, navigating school board politics, and holding my composure while a superintendent screamed at me about budget overruns had given me a skill I never expected to need at my own dinner table. The ability to keep my real face behind my professional one. The plan began to form that same night. I lay in bed listening to the house settle, and I did what I had done 1,000 times as a principal facing a crisis. I made a list. Not on paper. In my head. What I needed. A place to live that Megan did not know about. A bank account Megan could not access. Legal counsel to protect the house. A way to undo the power of attorney. Copies of every document in Rosa's folder, notarized. And an ally inside the system who could help me move fast when the time came. What I had, Rosa. 32 years of financial literacy. A clear mind getting clearer by the hour. And a deadline I could feel forming. Garrett had mentioned big summer plans at dinner, some project they were excited about, and the way Megan's eyes flicked toward me when he said it told me those plans involved my money in a way I could not yet see. Whatever they were building it on my pension, and if I waited too long, the money would be spent and the leverage would be gone. I started at the library. Every Tuesday and Thursday, days Megan thought I was at physical therapy for my knee, appointments I had stopped needing 2 years ago, but never told her I had canceled. The Syracuse Public Library became my operations center. I opened a new checking account at a bank 12 miles from my house, one I had to drive past 2 towns to reach. I redirected a small monthly transfer, just $200, from a forgotten savings account Paul and I had opened years ago that Megan apparently did not know existed. I could not touch the pension yet. Any disruption there would alert her immediately, but I could build a small reserve, enough for a deposit on an apartment, enough for first month's rent, enough for the basics of survival. The almost caught moment came on a Thursday. I had driven to the library and then to the bank, and then to look at a small apartment on the east side of Syracuse, a 1-bedroom above a bakery that smelled like sourdough and cost $850 a month. When I got home, Megan was standing in the kitchen with her phone in her hand and a look on her face that made my blood go cold. "Mom," she said, "where were you today? I checked the GPS on the car and you drove to Fayetteville." I had forgotten about the GPS. Megan had insisted on installing a tracking app 2 years ago, claiming it was for safety in case I broke down. In reality, it was a leash. My mind raced through every route I had taken. The bank was in Fayetteville. The apartment was not. I said, "I drove past that little antique shop on Route 5. You know, the one with the garden statues out front? I've been wanting to look for a side table for the bedroom." She stared at me for 3 seconds that lasted a year. Then she smiled and said, "You should have told me. I would have come." I smiled back. My hands were trembling inside my pockets. That night, I downloaded the GPS app on my phone, studied how it worked, and realized I could leave the car at the physical therapy office and walk to the library. 3 blocks. I would never drive to the bank again without a cover story mapped in advance. I need to pause here because there is something I want to say directly to you. If someone in your family handles your money and you have not seen a bank statement with your own eyes in over a year, that is not trust. That is a blindfold. Ask yourself right now, when was the last time you logged in? When was the last time you opened an envelope yourself? When was the last time a number on a screen matched a number in your memory? I am not saying your daughter or your son or your spouse is stealing from you. I am saying that trust without verification is not trust. It is faith. And faith belongs in a church, not in a bank account. Rosa contacted Margaret Chen. This was the next step, and it was Rosa's idea. Margaret, my former vice principal, the woman Megan had told me was gossiping behind my back, the woman whose calls I had stopped returning 5 years ago. Margaret was the person I needed. Rosa called her. Explained enough. And Margaret called me at the library on a Tuesday afternoon, and when I heard her voice, I started crying right there at the computer terminal. She said, "Colleen, I knew something was wrong. Megan told everyone you had dementia. She told me you didn't want visitors. She told Barbara and Diane the same thing. We believed her because she was your daughter, and who lies about their mother's mind?" Margaret paused. Then she said, "You balanced books better than anyone I ever met. Tell me what you need." What I needed was a lawyer, and Margaret's brother-in-law practiced elder law in Syracuse. Within a week, I had a consultation. Within 2 weeks, I had a plan. The power of attorney could be revoked with a signed document and a witness. The house could be transferred into an irrevocable trust, Margaret as co-trustee with me, which would make it untouchable by Megan, by Garrett, by any debt they had attached to my name. The home equity line of credit was fraud. I had not signed the application, and a handwriting analysis would prove it. The pension redirection was theft. Both were prosecutable, But the lawyer said the priority was protection first, prosecution later. Secure the assets, then decide what justice looks like. The apartment on the east side was too close. Margaret found me a cottage rental near Skaneateles Lake, 30 miles from Syracuse, a small 2-bedroom behind a row of birch trees, with a porch that looked out over the water. $900 a month. Margaret co-signed the lease using her own credit. I gave her the deposit in cash, withdrawn in small amounts from the hidden account over 3 weeks, each withdrawal timed to a Tuesday or Thursday when I was supposedly at therapy. Every bill, every coin, felt like a brick in a wall I was building between myself and the life Megan had constructed around me. Then came the birthday dinner, and I need to tell you about this because it almost broke me. 3 weeks into my preparation, Megan threw me a surprise party. She invited neighbors. She baked a cake, lemon with cream cheese frosting, my favorite, a recipe she had gotten from Paul's mother. She gave a toast in the dining room with tears in her eyes, telling everyone how grateful she was to live with her mother, how the past 9 years had been the best of her life, how she hoped they would grow old together in this house. She hugged me, and her arms wrapped around my shoulders, and I could feel the warmth of her body and the specific pressure of her embrace. And I thought, this is what a cage feels like when it is made of flesh, because the woman holding me had rerouted $412,000 of my pension. The woman crying about growing old together had texted her husband about waiting for me to die. The woman who baked my favorite cake could not tell me the balance of the account my money flowed into because she would have had to admit the account existed. I hugged her back. I said thank you. And later that night, alone in the bathroom, I sat on the edge of the tub and pressed a towel against my face and screamed into it without making a sound. There was one moment when I doubted Rosa. It was brief, but it was real, and I owe the honesty of telling it. 2 weeks before my planned departure, Rosa came to clean, and she was different. Quiet. Avoidant. She would not meet my eyes. I stood in the kitchen watching her wipe the same counter 3 times, and I thought, with a sickness that started in my stomach and climbed to my throat, what if she is protecting Megan? What if the folder was a test? What if Megan sent her? The paranoia of living under surveillance is that it colonizes your ability to trust anyone, even the person who handed you the evidence of your own captivity. I said, "Rosa, are you okay?" She stopped wiping. She looked at me, and she said, "I am afraid for you. I am afraid that when you leave, she will come after me too." She was not protecting Megan. She was frightened. She had built the weapon of my liberation, and she was terrified of the blast radius. I took her hands in mine, her hands that had cleaned my house for 18 years, that had photocopied my freedom 1 page at a time, and I said, "When I leave, you leave too. I will pay you myself. From my own account. The real one." She nodded. She finished cleaning, and she never wavered again. The final preparations happened in a compression of days that felt like hours. The lawyer filed the revocation of power of attorney on a Monday. The trust documents were signed on a Wednesday. I drove to the lawyer's office during my supposed therapy window, signed alongside Margaret, and drove back in time to start dinner. The locksmith was scheduled for Saturday, the day Megan had booked a spa weekend in the Finger Lakes. Garrett would be at a golf outing. The house would be empty for 6 hours. 6 hours to change my life. Friday night. The last night. I lay in my bed in the house on Meadowbrook Drive, and I listened to every sound that house made. The furnace cycling on, the creak of the 3rd stair. The one Paul always said he would fix. The hum of the refrigerator that had been my only company in those first months of widowhood. Outside, a car passed on the street, and its headlights swept across the ceiling like a slow hand. I could smell the remnants of dinner, garlic, olive oil, the faint trace of the rosemary Megan had clipped from the garden that was planted with seeds I had bought with money she had stolen. I ran through the plan one more time. Tomorrow morning, Megan leaves at 9 for the spa. Garrett leaves at 8 for golf. At 9:15, the locksmith arrives. While he works, I pack one suitcase. One. I take clothes, medications, my laptop, Paul's watch, the photo albums from the top shelf of the closet, and I take the mug. The #1 principal mug that my students gave me at retirement. The one Megan filled with her pencils and set on the counter like she owned it. I am taking it back. Everything else stays. The furniture, the decorations, the kitchen full of appliances she bought with my pension. Let her look at them through windows she can no longer open. I did not sleep. I watched the ceiling lighten from black to gray to the thin blue of an early Syracuse morning. Somewhere in the house, a pipe ticked as the water heater cycled, and I counted the ticks the way I used to count Paul's breathing before he fell asleep. At 6:45, Garrett's alarm went off down the hall. I heard him shower, dress, leave. The front door closed at 7:50. The sound of it latching was louder than it had any right to be, a clean metallic click that traveled through the floorboards and into my chest. At 8:15, Megan knocked on my bedroom door. 2 knocks. Light. The knocks of a woman who expected the door to be irrelevant. "Mom, I'm heading out. Back tomorrow evening. There's leftover pasta in the fridge." I said, "Have a wonderful time, sweetheart." My voice did not break. My hands, gripping the blanket under the covers, were steady. I had rehearsed that sentence 14 times in the shower the night before. She left. I heard her car start. The SUV, leased in my name, engine turning over on fuel I paid for. I heard the engine note fade down Meadowbrook Drive until the street swallowed it. And then the house was silent in a way it had not been silent in 9 years. A silence I controlled. I moved like I had rehearsed it, because I had. Suitcase from under the bed, already half-packed in layers beneath winter clothes Megan never touched. Into the closet for the photo albums. Paul and me at our wedding, Megan as a baby, the family portraits she had never asked to see. I held the wedding album for a moment. The cover was slightly warped from the year the basement flooded, and the texture under my thumb was a topography of the life I was now leaving behind. Into the bathroom for medications, toiletries, the small bag I had pre-staged behind the towels. Into the kitchen. I stood in front of the counter and I looked at the mug. #1 principal. My student's handwriting on the ceramic, the little red apple with a chip on its stem from the year Megan knocked it off the counter reaching for the coffee maker. The morning light from the window above the sink fell across the mug and lit the red of that apple, and for a moment it glowed like a small coal. I pulled out her pencils one by one and set them on the counter in a neat row. 12 pencils. I counted them as I removed them. Each one leaving the mug felt like a finger being pried from my wrist. I placed the mug in my bag, wrapped in a dish towel. Then I took out the envelope. 1 sheet of paper inside. A photocopy of the text message from Megan's burner phone. "Mom doesn't suspect a thing. When she dies, the house is ours free and clear. Just keep smiling at Thanksgiving." I set it on the counter where the mug had been, centered it, made sure it was visible from the doorway. I wanted her to see it the way I had seen it, without warning, without context, without anyone there to soften the blow. The locksmith arrived at 9:12. Professional, efficient, no questions beyond the work order. I stood in the living room while he worked on the front door, and I could hear the old deadbolt resist, then give, then the new mechanism slide into place with a sound that was heavier, more certain. 4 exterior doors, new deadbolts, new keys. The brass of the new keys was bright and unmarked, and when he handed them to me, I closed my fist around them and felt the teeth press into my palm. 4 keys, 4 doors that would not open for anyone but me. He was done by 10:30. I paid him $340 in cash, and he left. I walked through the house one final time, the living room where Paul and I had danced to Van Morrison on our 20th anniversary. his hand on the small of my back, the carpet worn thin in front of the stereo where we always stood. The kitchen where I had packed 8,000 school lunches and graded papers at the table and believed I was safe. The light fell across the counter in the same angle it always had, illuminating the spot where the mug had been. A faint ring on the granite. 9 years of condensation had left a ghost of its shape. Megan's room, still full of her things, her clothes, her products, the life she had built on the scaffolding of my stolen pension. I did not go inside. I stood in the doorway and I looked at the room of a woman I no longer recognized, and I smelled her perfume. Something expensive, floral, a scent that had become the smell of deception itself. And I closed the door. The latch caught with a soft click that meant nothing and everything. I carried my suitcase down the front steps. The morning was cool and bright. Mid-April, the dogwoods just starting to bloom along the sidewalk, their white petals catching the light like fragments of paper scattered by a wind that had already passed. I set the suitcase in the trunk of my car. I got in. I adjusted the mirror. My own face looked back at me, and I studied it for a moment. The lines around my eyes, the set of my jaw, the expression of a woman who had made a decision and crossed the border between thinking about it and living inside it. And I drove away from Meadowbrook Drive at 10:47 in the morning without looking back. Not because I did not care, because looking back was a luxury for people who had not spent 9 years being robbed by their only child while being told it was love. The drive to Scanitli's took 41 minutes. I know because I watched every mile on the odometer with the focus of someone who had learned to track distances for survival. Route 175 to Route 20, past the farmland and the small towns, the lake appearing in glimpses through the trees before it opened up wide and flat and silver. The road hummed under the tires, and I kept both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2, the way Paul had always driven, the way I had teased him about for 29 years. I turned onto the road where the cottage sat. Gravel under the tires, each stone popping against the undercarriage like a small percussion. Birch trees on either side, their bark white and peeling, dappled light moving across the windshield. I parked. I sat in the car for a full minute. The engine ticked as it cooled. 7 ticks, 8, 9, each one slower than the last, the mechanical heartbeat of a machine settling into rest. A bird I could not identify sang 3 notes, and paused and sang them again, as if waiting for an answer that never came. I opened the door. The air smelled like lake water and pine bark, and something green and alive that I could not name, but that my lungs recognized before my mind did. I took my suitcase from the trunk. I walked to the front door of my cottage. Mine, my name on the lease, my key in my hand, and I turned the lock and stepped inside. The silence. I need to tell you about the silence because it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Not the absence of sound, the absence of surveillance. No footsteps coming. No voice calling my name with that particular rising inflection that meant Megan wanted something. No door opening behind me. No phone buzzing with a location check. No presence in the next room calculating my usefulness. Just the hum of an empty refrigerator in a kitchen that was mine. The creak of floorboards under feet that were going exactly where they wanted to go. The sound of a door closing and staying closed, because I was the one who closed it, and no one was coming through it unless I decided to let them in. A stripe of afternoon light lay across the wooden floor like a path drawn in gold, and dust motes turned in it slowly, unbothered, answerable to nothing. My body did something I did not expect. I set the suitcase down and my hands began to shake, not from fear, from release, like the muscles that had been clenched for 9 years in my jaw, in my shoulders, in the tight fist of my chest, suddenly received the signal that the threat was over and they could let go. I stood in the middle of that small living room and I shook. My breath came in waves, deep, shuddering inhalations that pulled from the very bottom of my lungs, air that had not been breathed that fully in years. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the plaster, and I cried. Not the silent towel-pressed crying of the woman in the bathroom at the birthday dinner. Full crying. The kind that comes with sound, that fills a room, that does not care who hears because there is no one to perform for, no face to manage, no composure to maintain. I cried on the floor of my cottage near Skanidales Lake for 20 minutes, and when I stopped, the knot in my chest, the one that had lived there so long I had forgotten what breathing without it felt like, had loosened. Not gone. Loosened. Like a fist slowly opening, I unpacked the mug first, unwrapped it from the dish towel, set it on the porch railing outside where the morning light hit the ceramic and the red apple glowed. I made coffee in the small kitchen. The coffee maker was secondhand, a $12 machine from the Goodwill on Route 20 that Margaret had bought and left on the counter the week before, and it brewed slowly and loudly, and it was perfect. I poured it into the mug. I sat on the porch and I drank coffee from a cup that said Number 1 Principal while looking at a lake that did not know my name and did not need to. The water lapped at the shore with a rhythm that asked nothing of me. That was the first moment of my free life. Megan discovered the locks at 4:17 the next afternoon. I know the time because that is when the first call came. I was sitting on the porch reading a novel. An actual novel? Fiction. Something I had not done in years because Megan always had the television on and always needed something, and there was never silence long enough for a page to settle. My phone buzzed. Megan's name on the screen, the letters sharp and black against the white notification bar. I set it face down on the railing next to the mug and turned the page. The calls escalated with a precision that would have been fascinating if it had not been my daughter on the other end of an unraveling life. 4:17, missed call. 4:20, text message. Mom, where are you? The door won't open. 4:31, another call, longer ring, voicemail left. I did not listen to it until later. 4:45. 3 texts in rapid succession. Mom, call me back. Something is wrong with the locks. Are you okay? The question marks multiplied like her concern was genuine. By 5:15, the texts had shifted. Mom, this isn't funny. Did you change the locks? I need to get inside the house. I could picture her standing on the porch I had swept 1,000 times, her key useless in her hand, the deadbolt refusing to turn, the brass catching the late afternoon light. By 6 o'clock, she had found the envelope. I know this because the texts stopped for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence from a woman who had not gone 40 minutes without checking her phone since the smartphone was invented. I imagined her reading those 7 words. I imagined the kitchen around her, the ring on the counter where the mug had been, the 12 pencils lined up in a row, the late light slanting through the window above the sink, and that single sheet of paper sitting where her mother's mug used to be. I wondered if the silence was shock or strategy. Whether she spent those 40 minutes crying or calculating. When the texts resumed, the tone was different. Mom, we need to talk about this. There's been a misunderstanding. That text was taken out of context. Out of context. When she dies, the house is ours free and clear. What context makes that acceptable? What framing turns that sentence into anything other than what it is? I set the phone face down again. The lake was turning violet in the dusk. I did not respond. By the next morning, Garrett was calling. His voice on the voicemail was different from Megan's. Less anger, more fear. I could hear it in the way his consonants softened, the way his breath caught between words. The condo mortgage had bounced. The payment he had been servicing with my pension money, money that was no longer flowing, had failed, and the bank had frozen every linked account pending review. He said the word please 4 times in a 90-second message. He said they could work this out. He said there had been a miscommunication about the finances. He said Megan was upset. He said, "Could I just call and let them explain?" His voice cracked on the word explain, and for a fraction of a second I felt something that might have been pity before I remembered the text message. Before I remembered, "Just keep smiling at Thanksgiving." I set the phone face down and refilled my coffee. The cascade moved faster than I expected. Within 10 days, the condo mortgage was in default. $1,800 a month they could no longer cover without my pension to supplement Megan's dental office salary. The luxury SUV, leased in my name, co-signed with the power of attorney I had since revoked, was repossessed from their driveway on a Tuesday afternoon while the neighbors watched. Margaret told me later that 2 women from across the street were standing at their mailboxes when the tow truck arrived, and neither of them moved for the entire 7 minutes it took to hook the vehicle and pull it from the driveway. Megan's curated Instagram life. The posts about her beautiful home, her blessed life, her grateful heart, began to crack as the people around her learned where the money had come from. A neighbor told Margaret, who told me, that when the SUV was towed, Megan stood in the driveway screaming that there had been a mistake, that her mother was confused, that she had the paperwork to prove everything was legitimate. She did not have the paperwork. I had the paperwork. 94 pages of it, notarized and filed with my attorney. The narrative control was the part I had prepared for. Megan called my old friends, the ones she had cut off years ago, and told them I was experiencing cognitive decline, that I had wandered off, that she was worried about my safety. She used the same playbook she had used for 9 years, the same words, the same tremor in her voice. But this time the audience had been briefed. She called the police for a wellness check. An officer came to the cottage, a young woman, courteous, standing on my porch with her hands clasped in front of her. I showed him my ID, my lease, my sound mind, and the contact information of my attorney. I answered every question she asked with the clarity of a woman who had spent 32 years running faculty meetings. She left satisfied. Megan called Rosa. Rosa did not answer. Rosa was sitting on my porch at the time, drinking tea, watching the call come through on her screen. She turned the phone face down on the railing the same way I had turned mine, and we looked at each other, and neither of us said a word. Megan called Margaret. Margaret answered, and what she said I later heard from Margaret herself. "Megan, I have seen every document. I have read every text, and I am the co-trustee on the house your mother paid for. Do not call me again." That conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Margaret said Megan was silent for the first 45 seconds. Nearly half the call was empty air. Garrett filed for separation 6 weeks after the locks changed. I heard about it from Margaret, who heard it from someone at the courthouse. The financial structure Megan had built, the condo, the car, the lifestyle, the plans for summer that required my pension to sustain, had collapsed like a building with its foundation removed, which is exactly what it was. I was the foundation, and I had removed myself. If you are listening to this and you are planning your own exit from a marriage, a family dynamic, a financial arrangement that has you trapped, I want you to hear this part carefully. The hardest moment is not the leaving. The hardest moment is the morning after the birthday dinner, when the person who is stealing from you bakes your favorite cake and hugs you, and you have to hug them back. The hardest moment is the GPS check, the casual question that might be a trap, the performance of a love you no longer feel for a person who is performing it right back at you. The logistics are solvable. The emotional cost of the double life is the price no one warns you about. But it is a price worth paying. Because the alternative is staying in a cage made of someone else's smile and hoping it opens on its own. It does not open on its own. You open it, with patience, with planning, and with people like Rosa and Margaret who see you clearly and refuse to look away. 3 months have passed. The cottage near Skaneateles Lake is no longer temporary. I signed a 12-month lease. The porch has 2 chairs now. One for me, one for Margaret, who drives out every Saturday with scones and sharp observations about the school board we both left behind. Rosa comes on Thursdays, because some rituals are sacred, but she comes as a friend who happens to prefer my cottage spotless. We drink tea on the porch, and she tells me about her grandchildren, and I listen to her with the attention of a woman who knows that this person preserved her life one photocopied page at a time. Last Thursday, she brought flowers from her garden, yellow marigolds in a glass jar, and set them on the kitchen windowsill without a word. They are still there. They catch the morning light in a way that makes the whole room warmer. My finances are my own again. The pension was redirected back to an account in my name at a bank I chose. Every month, $3,820 arrives in that account, and I see the deposit notification on my own phone, on my own screen, and I read the number myself. The home equity line of credit is under investigation. My attorney filed a fraud claim, and the handwriting analysis confirmed what I already knew. I never signed that application. The forensic examiner said the signature was not even a skilled forgery. It was hasty, confident, the penmanship of someone who never imagined being questioned. The house on Meadowbrook Drive sits in an irrevocable trust with Margaret and me as co-trustees. Megan cannot touch it, cannot enter it, cannot leverage it. It is mine in a way it was always supposed to be mine, documented, protected, and free of the daughter who saw it as an inheritance she was merely waiting to collect. Megan is living in a studio apartment in North Syracuse, $475 a month, utilities included. Garrett took his name off the condo before the bank could pursue him further and moved to Rochester. The separation is proceeding. The Instagram account is deactivated. The life that was built on $412,000 of a retired teacher's pension has returned to the dimensions that her own income can sustain. I am told she works full-time now at the dental office. I am told she is angry. I am told she has not accepted what happened. I do not know these things firsthand because I have not spoken to my daughter since the morning she left for the spa, and I said, "Have a wonderful time, sweetheart." Those were my last words to her. I chose them carefully, though she did not know it at the time. They were not a lie. I meant them. I hoped she would have a wonderful time. It was the last kind thing I could offer her before I took my life back. I am sitting on the porch as I tell you this. The mug is on the railing, half full of coffee that has gone cool because I have been talking instead of drinking. The lake is flat this morning, silver gray, the birch trees reflected on its surface like white brush strokes on a mirror. A breeze comes across the water and I feel it on my face, and I do not flinch. I do not calculate who is watching or what the breeze means about anyone else's mood. It is just wind. It touches my face and moves on. I used to think that trust and love were the same thing, that if you loved someone enough, you could trust them with everything. Your money, your mail, your friendships, your future. I was wrong. Love is a feeling. Trust is a system. And a system without verification is not a system. It is a story someone tells you while they empty your accounts. I also used to think that leaving meant losing, that walking away from my daughter meant losing my family. But I did not lose my family. I recovered it. Rosa and Margaret and the women from the retired teacher's lunch who call me now, who drive to the lake, who sit on this porch and remind me that I was never the confused woman Megan described. I was the woman who ran a school. And then I ran an extraction. If you are sitting somewhere right now and your chest is tight and you are thinking about someone who handles things for you, someone who tells you not to worry, who collects the mail, who says the money is fine, I am not telling you they are stealing from you. I am telling you to look. That is all. Just look. Because the difference between trust and a blindfold is a single bank statement opened with your own hands. This story has been told. one ceramic mug reclaimed from a counter where it never belonged, one 94-page folder built in secret by a woman who promised a dying man she would watch, and one envelope left on a kitchen counter containing the 7 words that ended a 9-year theft. If any of this landed for you, if you are thinking about someone you love whose finances you have not verified, or if you are the one planning in silence right now, tell me in the comments. And if you have not yet, subscribe. There are more stories like this one, and the next one is already waiting. I will see you there.